there was only one name that came to mind. The perfect man to do this is the great Dan Hardy, a.k.a. The Outlaw. Here he is from his familiar set. Dan, how are you?
I'm good, Ariel. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. What a night. It was one of those nights that I think that we'll be talking about for quite some time, very similar to 2014 Dublin. I don't think you were in attendance, right, on Saturday, but you were certainly watching. Did it remind you of 2014?
Oh, it did absolutely, yeah. I mean, a much bigger arena. The Dublin arena, I think it held about 7,000 fans, and it felt a lot more intimate, especially when 50% of the air was filled with beer and Guinness. The O2 Arena has got more that Colosseum kind of feeling, and I think you could feel that on Saturday night. Even through the TV, it's got that. Yeah, there's such a grand feeling to the O2 Arena. You feel it as you're walking up to the arena. As a fighter, you feel it as you're pulling into the backstage area on buses, and I think that comes through on the performances. It's just always a special event, and I'm glad that UK MMA delivered, because I know how talented the fighters are over here, and it's very rare that they get to perform on home soil.
So I mentioned on Monday that one of the best parts of an event like this is you have a magical night, and there's probably some 15, 16-year-old kid who's watching, and he says, I want to be there, I want to do this. And 5 years ago, the same thing happened, and these guys are here fighting now. And maybe you wouldn't want to say this, but I feel like we don't have this moment in UK MMA, if not for you and Michael Bisping and some of the others, but mainly you two guys, right? When you watch this, do you watch like a proud papa? Do you feel some sort of ownership?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I remember when the UFC first started to come over to the UK. I wasn't on that first card, of course. We had Ian Freeman and Mark Weir, James Zikic, Lee Remedios. They were the guys that stepped foot in the octagon on UK soil for the first time. But when Bisping and I started competing in the UFC, it seemed like a much more of a staple within UK MMA. We've always had good shows over here. Cage Warriors has always been really consistent. But then when the UFC started to come over, they were such big events. UFC 105 was amazing. 95 was incredible. But they just seemed to keep leveling up. I mean, that at the weekend was, in my opinion, it was the best performance of UK mixed martial arts in a long, long time, if not ever. The times that stand out before maybe was Bisping against Anderson Silva. But that was a spectacular moment, because it was a battle of attrition, and there was drama, and there was back and forth, and it was bloody. And Anderson Silva, obviously, is the legend that he is, and Bisping now the Hall of Famer and legend as well. But it felt on Saturday like we had a lot of young stars emerging. Tom Aspinall's future's ahead of him. Arnold Allen's future's ahead of him. Same thing with Paddy and Molly and Jack Shaw. You could go down the list. All the UK fighters, they don't feel like they're kind of winding down and having that big, massive fight, towards the end of their career. It feels like there are lots of different, bandwagons that we can jump on right now, but they're all going in the same direction, and that's towards the rankings.
The other thing is, back in the day, I feel like they said the UK fighters are great, but they're primarily strikers, maybe a little jiu-jitsu, no wrestling. Those days are over. They're as well-rounded. Like, Aspinall reminds me of a mix of a young Frank Mir and Cain Velasquez. And I feel like that's the best compliment I could give him, right? Like each one of them, Mokaev, this guy is like a freaking beast on the mat, but you see what he does. I feel like that's been the most impressive part over the last couple of years, the evolution of the UK fighter. They're just a fighter now. They're not just, the fighter with the one skill set. It's completely come together. Would you agree?
I would definitely. And, you could even say that there is definitely a preference still towards striking, but they're so much better at all the other elements of their game that they can now strike a lot better than some of the fighters in the past in the UFC from the UK, because, we always had that deficit that we were going to get taken down, and, then we would be kind of out of our depth. I mean, I think, in my opinion, probably Brad Pickett was the first one to bridge that gap and become a very, very MMA fighter from the UK. Even Bisping and I, we were much more strikers that learned wrestling and takedown defense. And, Bisping eventually was able to become a very well-rounded MMA fighter, but it was a journey. I look at these guys now. I mean, Jack Shaw in particular, for me, he's just so complete as a fighter. Valiev's a very, very tough test, and I think he controlled the fight very well. He's a very mature fighter. There's not a facet of his game that I feel is very weak. Same thing with Tom Aspinall. I mean, he's an all-rounder. He can strike. As Bisping said the other day, he would be very successful as a boxer as well. But then, when he was fighting, Andre Arlovski, he had enough of striking, took him down and choked him out. He's a very, very well-rounded fighter at 12-2 in his career. It's exciting times for the UK because these guys are going to stay on the mats for a while, and they're going to be training alongside the next 2, 3, 4 generations of fighters who will be on the undercard of the UFC London cards for the next 2, 3 years coming.
In your opinion, who is the best UK-based fighter in the world right now?
I would have to say Leon. I would have to say Leon Edwards. I think he's very slick. He's very skilled. He's a very, very intelligent fighter. And I think sometimes that works against him. Sometimes he kind of overanalyzes circumstances and holds back. But on the moments when we see him shine, he looks incredible. And I think, this is a good opportunity against Usman. He's very familiar with Usman. They've fought before. I think Usman's, his striking's improved so much that he's going to be more confident now than he was previously to fight with Leon on the feet. And I think Leon's takedown defense and grappling skills have come up to the point where he's not going to feel so smothered by Usman if it hits the floor. I think right now he's the most well-rounded. But I honestly, Arnold Allen is incredibly well-rounded. He's a little bit reckless, but that's one of the reasons why we love him. Same thing with Jack Shaw. I've been watching Jack since he was a young kid coming up through Cage Warriors, and he's just always seemed like he was going to be a very complete fighter. Very smart. He can explain everything that he does and why he's doing it. And I just can't see him ever slowing down his progress the way that he's moving right now. He in my mind is the one that's going to be. He's the one to watch. He's the most consistent out of all of them, I feel.
Wow, that's high praise for Jack Shore. I hear the comparisons to GSP, a man you know very well. Do you see that in him? I think they call him the Welsh GSP or something like that. Do you like that comparison?
I do and I don't. I mean, I think there are some things. Obviously, it's a huge compliment to be compared to GSP, but Jack Shaw's very comfortably in every range of the fight, and GSP would use the ranges of the fight against his opponents where he would feel they would be weakest. Now, if you watch Jack Shaw against Hunter Azure, he gets into a striking match that he didn't really need to. He likes to fight as well, and I think that's something that we did see lacking in Georgia, towards the end of his career. He didn't quite enjoy it as much, and Jack is at that point where he's calculated, but he's flowing in the moment. I just feel like, you look at his game, he's taken the best parts of everything that's working in mixed martial arts right now. He's got a very complete skill set. He's got great takedown offense, but he's also got that incredible control up against the fence where he smothers people and forces them to give their back. Very consistent, taking people's backs and choking them out, but not, he's not in a rush to do it. He's quite happy to cook them a little bit and beat them up. I'm always excited to watch him fight. I think a lot of the other fighters on the card, they had fantastic performances, but these moments where they take risks that, they might pay for it against someone, further up the rankings. For me, Jack Shaw cuts through the nonsense and he deals with everything that's in front of him.
It's such a great point about taking a risk because, as a Montrealer, I have love for TriStar, but I do feel like they have molded their fighters into a certain way where they are not big risk takers, right? You think of GSP throughout his career, especially after the Matt Serra fight, even when Kenny went there, Kenny Florian, Rory McDonald, Arnold Allen isn't necessarily these days known as a risk taker. So to see him shed that and just go for it, I thought was really nice. Do you want to see more of that from Allen, or do you think that it's better to be the more traditional TriStar type fighter, use the jab, be methodical, cerebral, and not get into these, these moments like he had with Dan Hooker?
Of course, I don't want to see him get clipped on the chin and put down on one knee because, it makes me, take a second breath and my heart skips a beat. I think he's a very skilled fighter, and with the record that he's got now, one blemish on his record, you can see he's very calculated. But he was coming off a string of split decisions, I think, 3 in a row. They're just going to hold you back, those things. As well as this being a sport where you have to win consistently, you have to also win impressively. What are we talking about since the weekend? We're talking about Paddy blazing through Vargas and finishing with a rear naked choke with a bit of drama. And then also Molly catching her opponent with that spinning elbow. They're risk takers. And that's one of the reasons why we're talking about them coming out of the weekend. like as a technical analysis, I like to watch Jack Shaw and I like to watch Arnold Allen, in his decisions, because I can learn things from their approach. But as a fan, I want to see that chaos, that craziness. And I think Arnold, you've got to think most of the time he prepares at TriStar. I think this is the first time he's done his training camp in the UK. He's been training with the guys at Renegade. I know he's been traveling around the UK, but there was a little bit more recklessness to his game. But that might also be the opportunity that he had. Co-main event at the O2 Arena, you're fighting Dan Hooker and he's going to come for a bloodbath. I think it just brought the best out of Arnold, and he's finally arrived at that moment where he realizes who he is and what he's capable of. I think the calculated approach of TriStar is a very, very clever and very methodical breakdown of mixed martial arts. But you do need those bits of flair on the end. You do need those moments where you have that flash knockdown or that scramble up to the back. You probably watched Jordan Vachenik win at Cage Warriors on Friday night. He lost the first round to a really strong James Hendon, but that scramble to the back in the second was wicked to watch. The crowd were just bouncing. You need those moments to make people remember you.
How do you feel about the way the UFC has booked Paddy so far? 2 fights in, Big John saying earlier this week on his podcast that he fought tougher competition towards the end of his Cage Warriors days than he has thus far in the UFC. Do you like the way they booked him? Do you not like the way they booked him?
Yeah, I do like the way they booked him. I think the UFC recognized that Paddy's still a developing talent. To expect him to be thrown in, towards the top 15 and to be the same fighter that he was on Cage Warriors is, you just can't expect that. The other thing as well is, the guys that he's fighting, Vendramini and Vargas, they're not pushovers. They're tough individuals. They've both caught him with good punches. And there's been moments where Paddy did look like he could lose the fight. So to me, that tells me that they're matching him correctly for this moment, because those opportunities against other 155ers, they don't end in him turning around that fight around and finishing. They're gaps that need to be closed before he moves on from the Vargases and the Vendraminis of the division. Especially because 155 is a shark tank. It always has been up until recently, when it seems the sport's kind of leveled out across the weight classes a bit more. 155 has always had a real strong talent, and you've got to make sure that you've got no real massive holes in your game by the time you get to there. Like, sometimes there is a tendency to rush fighters, and the reality is as well, if you're paying Paddy, what was it, 12 and 12, you can't expect him to be fighting guys in the top 15. He's right in what he says. I'll fight better guys when you pay me better.
What do you make of that? It's been a huge story this morning. He admitted yesterday that he made 12 and 12. Now, he did get the bonus, but that's not a part of the deal. The deal is 12 and 12. When you hear that, what do you think?
The only thing, it's not surprising, but it's disappointing that things haven't moved on a great deal. I fought UFC 95. I was the co-main event, and my contract was 5 and 5.
Come on,
a $10,000 bonus.
5 and 5.
Yeah. That was my second fight on my contract. You fight what you agree to fight for. It is what it is. We all know that these fighters should be getting paid so much more than they are. The disappointing thing for me is the lack of security that these fighters are getting from their job. They need to feel like they're going to be supported and be able to pay their bills, especially with the global economic crisis and all this kind of stuff going on. You can't bank on sponsors being there to look after you. And if you think, what was that, 2009? Like, we're looking, 13 years on, and the pay's not increased a great deal. 5 and 5 for me and 12 and 12 for Paddy. You consider what the profit increases of the UFC have been. Is it 1,700% or something profit increases over the last few years? You've got to wonder where that money's going. And the bonuses are a lovely thing, but you can't get a mortgage on that. You can't start a business on that. What we need is these fighters getting paid, not so they can buy loads of watches and fancy cars, but so they can invest it back in the sport. Like, who's opening the gyms of MMA in the next 20 years? It's the guys that are fighting now. Like Brian Kelleher talking about him needing to get a job at Walmart. I want him to have an MMA gym, because he might be able to make a champion or two. That's the short-sightedness of the fighter pay thing for me, is that the grassroots stops growing. The grass goes brown, and then the UFC starts to cut its own head off because there's no talent coming through.
Dan, how about this? Last year, the UFC's revenue was approximately $1 billion. they have to make this public now because Endeavor's a public company. $1 billion, Dan. And guys are making 12 and 12. And who's the guy that we compare Paddy Pimblett to the most these days? Conor McGregor, right? He's the one. For Conor McGregor's second fight back in 2013 against Max Holloway, the one in Boston, Conor McGregor made 12 and 12 for that fight. And so you'll say, oh, he's making the same. Yeah, that was 9 years ago. It shouldn't be the same. It should grow exponentially. They didn't sell for $4 billion. They're not making the same amount of money. So that to me is very jarring when you hear, and if I'm being honest, I do think some of the onus has to be on the managers as well. The managers have to do a little more to get the fighters like a Paddy a little more money, but it's deflating to hear that. Like Paddy is hugely responsible for that crowd and the success of that show. He should not be making 12 and 12 when the UFC is making a $4.5 million gate in addition to all the other money that they're making. It just, when you see how the sausage is made, it gets a little bit depressing.
It does. It does. And, the problem is a lot of these young fighters, they're so grateful and so fortunate to be in the UFC because that's what they've been aiming for so long, that they'll take the crumbs off the table. That there are very few fighters that have the confidence to stand up for what they want. And unfortunately, we've just had a champion that's done it and nobody had his back. You hear one person, Francis Ngannou, had a fantastic speech on your show. He spoke truth, he spoke honesty, he spoke for the sports, and he spoke for every athlete in the sports. And what I see next is a whole bunch of other people signing very lucrative deals while they leave him in the dark. Like nothing's ever going to change if we have one person speaking out and everyone clapping and then signing behind closed doors. It's happened so many times. It happened, before I signed with the UFC. It happened while I was with the UFC. People disappear into an office and they come out with a smile on their face and a check in their pocket and they say nothing else. Like the sport needs to rally and it needs to stand on a level footing with one another and not think about taking one another's places. It's a very cutthroat industry. I mean, that's the job in itself. It's difficult to try and have fighters unite when their job is to beat each other up. Yeah. It's you can't unite outside the octagon and then be throwing punches inside. It's a juxtaposed position. It's hard for the fighters to understand the benefit of it, but it's necessary.
Drives me nuts, and this is a bit of a tangent, but I just want to say, it drives me nuts when I hear the younger guys say, oh, I hear all this talk about fighter pay, but you guys don't see how they treat us behind the scenes. You don't see the PI. Guys, the PI, every athlete, you don't think Man U has a great PI? You don't think every single, you don't think Ronaldo has access to a guy making his lunch, at the training grounds? These things aren't a reason for why you should be making 10 and 10. They try to almost justify it in their mind, meanwhile, ignoring the fact that they've got $1 billion in revenue. It drives me nuts, and I want to see all the fighters make more. Could I ask you, based on what you've seen from Paddy, and you've been watching him for some time in Cage Warriors, what's his ceiling? Do you think he can be a champion? Do you think he has what it takes?
Absolutely. I can't count anybody out at his age. He's got everything in front of him. He's got all of the opportunities. He's got the fame and the opportunities. Every gym door is going to swing open to him. The Performance Institute will welcome him in and build him up like their next top athlete because he's such a valuable commodity to the UFC. As long as he's dedicated and focused and he wants to be a world champion, there's nothing that could stop him. He's going to have to develop, of course. He's going to have to learn. But then everybody in the division that's not currently the champion has still got something to add to their game. A very, very few people get to a championship level. And, there's nothing to say that Paddy can't do it. Like I said, there are things he's got to work on. But he's still a young guy. 10 fights into his career. I mean, Michael Bisping, people counted him out over and over again. I'm not saying that we might see Paddy in his early 30s fighting for a belt and winning, but we can't count him out, with the flair and the aggression and the confidence that he has. Everything else can be bolted on the sides.
Speaking of championship level, I think Tom Aspinall is championship level already. I think this time next year he could either be interim champ or even, depending on how the Francis thing goes, about the fight for the belt, or even win. I don't know if there's a lot of guys who could beat him right now. Do you feel the same way, or do you want to see maybe one or two more from him?
I mean, I would love to see one or two more, but that's only because I can see how much better he could potentially be. He's a scary, scary prospect right now, but he's had 14 fights. The problem when he was on Cage Warriors is that there just aren't enough heavyweights around for him to be sparring with or fighting. So he's found himself in the UFC very much in a similar situation to Cyril Gane. Not had a great deal of experience, but there's no competition for them. So they're accelerated through the rankings to the point where they don't get the experience that, I mean, look at Andrei Arlovski or Alistair Overeem or Volkov. What is he, 35 and 34 and 10 now is his record. It's an incredible amount of experience. Like the fighter that Tom Aspinall is, if you give him another 10 fights of experience, that's a different fighter entirely. And it's not that he's not ready for the top guys in the division right now, but I'm most interested in seeing the potential of the individual as opposed to where they stand in comparison to everybody else. Because Tom's limitless, really.
Not a UK guy, but related to this card, do you think it was a mistake for Dan Hooker to go down to 45?
It's hard to say, It's hard to say because I don't know how he's feeling on his weight cut. I don't know how close he is to the weight class. I mean, if you look back into his career, when he signed with the UFC, he was a featherweight and he alternated wins and losses. The losses were always decisions and the wins were always stoppages. So he was either really effective or he was outpointed over the distance. And then he went up to lightweight and had 4 fights in a row where he starched everybody. And then he hit the top of the division where you're supposed to struggle. You're supposed to struggle against the guys that he was struggling with. But he's such a hard-headed fighter and he's so game for a fight that he puts himself at more risk than he needs to. I think in his head, he was going to go back down to featherweight with all that experience and be the bigger guy. But I also think he realized that he's the slower guy. He wasn't particularly fast as a lightweight. He's persistent and he's he pushes forward. But Arnold Allen looked super quick. For every one punch that Dan Hooker was throwing, Arnold was throwing 3 or 4. And that's a standard in the featherweight division now. I think it would be better for Dan Hooker to take maybe 6 to 12 months off, like entirely off, no contact, get some good rest, and then reapproach his career as a lightweight. I mean, he's a superstar. Who would not want to see him fight again? I just want him to do it healthily in the right weight class.
I was talking to someone earlier today, and they said they hypothesized that maybe he hasn't been quite the same since the Poirier fight, that maybe that took a lot out of him. That's a real thing, right? I mean, we saw that with Rory. Like, fighters are sometimes never the same after a fight like that. You think that there's, obviously it's impossible to know for sure, but perhaps some truth to that?
Yeah, 100%. People need to realize, this is sport and it's entertainment, but you can have a serious characteristic change from one fight to the next. There are a few fighters that stand out in my mind, and I would never mention their names on live on a broadcast, but I've seen them before the fight, a few days before the fight. I've had a conversation with them. I've seen them get stopped at the weekend pretty badly, and then I've seen them not have the same look in their eye ever since. There's a subtle change that sometimes happens with a fighter when they get really beaten up or stopped really badly. And, that's why we need to be a bit more cautious with these guys and putting them through the ringer, because we don't know which punch it is that's going to change them. And, sometimes it's not a physiological change. Sometimes it's not like a brain injury or a physical injury. Sometimes it just takes their soul a little bit. They don't feel like they're the same person. I don't think Dan Hooker doubts himself in any way, but I do think he takes a lot of damage in his fights, and I do think that's probably unnecessary. The Paul Felder fight, I mean, you were talking to John earlier about it. We were Octagon side for that, and they took lumps out of one another. I thought Felder was done in the first round. I thought Dan Hooker was done in the second, third round. It's a wild sport, and Dan Hooker's had 30 plus fights now, nearly 40 fights. They do take their toll. But, if he takes some time and he rests and he reapproaches his career maybe 12 months down the line, we might see a whole new wave of career for him.
Last thing on this card, Topuria had a great win over Jai Herbert. Herbert looked tremendous in the first, crazy knockout in the second. He very much wants Paddy. Do you think he can get Paddy? There's a lot of people, and even himself, it's like, they're not going to give me him. What do you think? Do you think that the UFC would do that?
I think this is a very interesting circumstance because I think Topuria wants to go back down to featherweight. So him calling out Paddy is actually going to open that door back up for him, because I think the UFC would much rather him go back down to featherweight than to stay at lightweight and fight Paddy next. It's like it removes the option for that match to be made if he moves back down to his weight class. I mean, I think Ilia could stay at 155, but if he can make 145 healthy, that's the weight class for him. I think it's a bad matchup for Paddy right now because Ilia is very, very direct in his game. You know, he had a really rough first round against Ilia, but his fights previously, you know, he's an absolute monster. He attacks the neck in the first round. If he doesn't get it, it's the overhand in the second. I think it would be a fascinating matchup and it would really sell, but there's also a risk it could potentially derail Paddy for the sake of a bit of, you know, a bit of a disagreement that no one's really paying much attention to now.
Last time I spoke to you, there were some rumblings of you and Tyron Woodley in March. It doesn't look like it's happening. March is about to be done. What is going on with you? And now I hear you talked a little bit about Eagle FC recently. Broadcaster, fighter, where are we at in terms of your active competitor career?
Honestly, it's all up in the air. We've been negotiating for a boxing match in June, and I've had 3 opponents on the table. I've agreed to all of them, and none of them have come off at the moment. So I'm kind of seeing what's happening with that. I would have been at one championships event on the 26th this weekend. What a card that is! I was going to be out there, but I've got guys on Cage Warriors. So at the moment, I'm just kind of taking it one weekend at a time because there are so many things going on. But I feel in great shape. I'm training. I'll see what the next couple of months offers me. But at the moment, what I'm looking for really is the next microphone I'm going to be speaking into. I've got some options on the table. So probably within the next couple of months, I'll be signing a contract to deal with one of the other promotions.
Okay, to be a color analyst again for the events.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that mean that you will no longer do Cage Warriors?
No, I'll always do Cage Warriors.
Okay.
I mean, I love being a part of those events. You know, the Indigo at the O2 was wild on Friday night. They always have great fights. Just signed a few more of my guys from the team as well. So I want to be a witness to their careers as they come through Cage Warriors and pick up belts before moving on. So I'll always be a part of Cage Warriors. I've got belts hanging up in my gym over there as well. It's a part of my blood, Cage Warriors is. So I love it. But I would like to get out and travel and to be in front of a bigger audience, a different audience, maybe in Asia or somewhere in Europe.
Okay.
But we'll see. There's a few options on the table, and MMA, as you know full well, is exploding behind the scenes at the moment. And I think within the next few months, there's going to be a lot of shifts and changes and organizations emerging and strengthening, and exciting times to be a part of it, Ariel.
Yes, and just to be clear, the one championship thing that you mentioned, they have their big 10th anniversary show this weekend. That was to be what? A fan, a broadcaster, a competitor? What was that for?
It wasn't a competitor because
Okay.
we were talking about the John Wayne Parr fight, and that one never came about. But he's got Edward Folayang. That's going to be a really interesting one because obviously Folayang's got a wushu background and he's predominantly an MMA fighter. I think it's a really good card. I was planning on being out there to help them promote it, to do some media, potentially sit circle side and talk about the fights as they were progressing as well. But we'll see. I have a very encouraging and youthful relationship with One Championship. I think there are a lot of options on the table. I'm going to be watching this Aoki Akiyama fight closely this weekend because 2 old guys like me that are fighting that might be a potential opponent for the future. Who knows? Okay,
very interesting. And as far as the opponents for boxing, who are we thinking of? Any names we can share?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, they keep, because I want to fight a pro boxer. I want to fight someone that's well recognized. But the names that keep coming to me they're all kind of too small. I don't want to be fighting a guy that's like 5'7", 5'6", and there's some good options on the table, but they're just not. They're not the right fights, They're not the right fights. When the right one presents itself, the most important thing is I'm doing my martial arts journey, and if that takes me back to fighting at some point, then I'll do it. It's a conversation that happens over and over again, and I never seem to have any progress for anybody. But it's life is taking me in so many different directions right now. I just need to stay ready for whatever's going to come, and if that's a fight, then it will be. But I'd like to be commentating again soon on a big show.
And the Woodley thing is dead?
I just don't know where he's gone.
Right.
I literally don't know where he's gone. He's kind of fallen off the face of the planet. I've had a couple of different organizations put offers towards him, and I know they're good offers. I know they're comparable with what he was getting because I've spoken to the team on the other side that have already paid him his paycheck. So I don't know. I don't know what the hesitation is, to be honest. It makes no sense to me. I mean, it's a good chunk of money. It'd be a bit of fun. He could punch me in the face. I know he hates me. I don't really care either way, to be honest. But I like it when people don't like me and they're trying to hit me because it makes me giggle. I just think it'd be a lot of fun, and he just doesn't seem to want any part of it. I don't know whether his brand's taken too much of a hit over the past couple of years to take a loss against me as well. Maybe that makes sense.
Well, always great to talk to you, Dan. Appreciate the insight. I'm not going to harp on this. I don't want this, but I'll just say this. You don't have to say anything. It was a great night. It was a magical night. It was great to see John and Bisping there. And I love Felder. You should have been there as well. Everyone knows that. You should have been there. And you don't even have to say anything, but it wasn't the same without you. And that's me saying, friend to friend. So I know better days are ahead, and you're going to be on a broadcast very soon. I can't wait for that. You're a compliment, a testament to the sport. So thank you for always coming on and for sharing your knowledge. And I can't wait to see what's coming up next for you in the coming months. And perhaps we'll have you back on to talk about that whenever it happens.
I'd like that, Ariel. It's always good talking to you, and I appreciate your kind words. I did thoroughly enjoy the broadcast on Saturday night. I will just say that. John does a fantastic job, and I agree with you. He needs more broadcasts. The more we see him, the better he gets. So I hope he gets some more opportunities.
Amen. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ariel.
There he is, the outlaw, Dan Hardy, one of the very best minds in the game, and great insight there, great stuff. On the card, on the fighters. He knows them very, very well. And so I enjoyed speaking to him.